Sit down, dear ones. What I'm about to tell you will shake you to your very core. My name is Mildred Thompson, and at 73 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. The morning of September 15th started like any other. I woke up in my small apartment, the same one I'd been living in for the past 5 years since my Harold passed away. The walls were thin, and I could hear Mrs. Patterson next door arguing with her television again. But something felt different that day. Maybe it was the way the autumn light filtered through my threadbare curtains, or maybe it was the letter that had arrived the previous evening, the one I hadn't had the courage to open yet. You see, for the past 47 years, I had been the heart and soul of Thompson Family Restaurant. Not just an employee, mind you, but the very foundation upon which that establishment was built. When my son Edgar was just a boy of 12, barely able to reach the kitchen counter, I started washing dishes in the back of what was then called Murphy's Diner. The previous owner, old Mr. Murphy, had gambling debts that would make your head spin, and he was desperate to sell. Harold and we scraped together every penny we had. We sold my mother's china, Harold's fishing boat, even my wedding ring, though I got that back later when times got better. We bought that little restaurant with nothing but hope and determination. I named it Thompson Family Restaurant because I believed, truly believed, that it would be our family's legacy for generations to come. For nearly 5 decades, I poured my heart and soul into that place. I was there at 5 a.m, preparing fresh biscuits from my grandmother's recipe. I stayed until midnight, cleaning tables and counting the day's earnings. I missed Edgar's school plays, his graduation, even his wedding rehearsal dinner, because that restaurant demanded everything. I had to give, but I didn't mind. Not really, because I was building something for my children, Edgar, my eldest, and my daughter Margaret. I was creating a legacy that would provide for them long after Harold and I were gone. Every burnt finger, every aching back, every sleepless night was an investment in their future. The restaurant flourished under my care. We became known throughout the county for our Sunday fried chicken dinners and my famous apple pie. People would drive for hours just to taste my cornbread. Local newspapers wrote about us. We were featured in travel guides. The Thompson Family Restaurant became a landmark, a piece of living history. When Harold died 5 years ago, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. Edgar, now a successful lawyer with his own practice, and Margaret, married to a wealthy businessman, promised they would take care of me. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mama," Edgar had said at the funeral, his arm around my shaking shoulders. "The restaurant is doing so well, and we'll make sure you're comfortable." For a while, that seemed to be true. Edgar took over the business side of things, handling the books and the legal matters. Margaret helped with scheduling and inventory. I continued to cook, continued to be the face that customers expected to see when they walked through those doors. It felt like a natural transition, like everything was falling into place exactly as it should. But then, slowly, things began to change. It started with small things. Edgar would make decisions without consulting me, changing suppliers, adjusting menu prices, hiring new staff without my input. When I questioned him, he would pat my hand patronizingly and say, "Mama, you've done enough. Let us handle the business side now. You just focus on cooking." Margaret began visiting less frequently. When she did come by, she seemed distracted, always checking her phone or talking about her husband's latest business ventures. The warmth that had once existed between us began to feel forced, artificial. Then came the bigger changes. Edgar installed new point-of-sale systems that I didn't understand. He hired a young manager named Kevin, who barely acknowledged my presence. Most painfully, he began to suggest that maybe I should take it easier, that perhaps I didn't need to be at the restaurant every single day. "You're 73, Mama," he would say. "You should be enjoying your retirement, not working yourself to the bone." But the restaurant wasn't work to me. It was my life, my purpose, my identity. Without it, who was I? Just another elderly woman sitting alone in a tiny apartment, waiting for death to come calling. The final blow came 6 months ago. Edgar called a family meeting at the restaurant after closing time. Margaret was there, looking uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Edgar had spreadsheets and documents spread across table number 4, the same table where Harold and I used to sit every Sunday after church, planning our dreams. "Mama," Edgar began, his voice taking on that tone he used in court, "we need to talk about the future of the restaurant." He explained that the business was struggling. Competition from chain restaurants, rising costs, changing customer preferences, all of it was eating into the profits. The numbers he showed me were staggering. Debt that I hadn't known existed, loans that had been taken out against the property, expenses that seemed to multiply like rabbits. "We think it's time to sell," Margaret said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "There's a developer who's interested in the property. They want to build a shopping center." I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. Sell? Sell the restaurant that represented everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for? But what about the legacy? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What about keeping it in the family? Edgar sighed, looking at Margaret, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mama, there is no family business anymore. Margaret and I, we have our own lives, our own careers. We can't keep pouring money into a failing restaurant just for the sake of sentiment." They had it all planned out. The sale would bring in enough money to pay off the debts and leave a small amount for my retirement fund. They had already looked into senior living communities. They showed me brochures for places with names like Golden Sunset Manor and Peaceful Meadows Assisted Living. "You'll be so much happier," Margaret said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "No more worrying about the restaurant, no more long hours. You can focus on your hobbies, make new friends your own age." I signed the papers that night. What choice did I have? The restaurant was already drowning in debt that I hadn't known about. Edgar had power of attorney for the business matters. I was trapped, defeated, heartbroken. But here's where the story takes a turn that neither of my ungrateful children saw coming. You see, there was something they didn't know, something I had never told them about my arrangement with old Mr. Murphy when we first bought the restaurant all those years ago. Mr. Murphy had been a shrewd businessman despite his gambling problems. When Harold and I couldn't come up with the full purchase price up front, Murphy had agreed to an unusual arrangement. He would sell us the restaurant and the property, but he retained certain rights that would transfer to me personally, not to the business, upon his death. Murphy died 15 years ago, and his lawyer contacted me about those rights. I never mentioned it to Harold or the children because it seemed like such a small thing at the time. But those rights included something called a covenant of continuous operation. Essentially, the property could only be used as a restaurant. Any attempt to demolish the building or convert it to another use would result in the property reverting back to the Murphy estate. Or in this case to me, since I was the designated heir of those specific rights. The developer who wanted to build a shopping center? He had no idea about this covenant. Edgar and Margaret had no idea about this covenant. Their fancy lawyers had no idea about this covenant because it was buried in a separate set of documents that Murphy's estate lawyer had filed independently. Remember when I mentioned that letter I received on September 15th? It was from Murphy's estate lawyer, now a very old man himself, reminding me about the covenant and informing me that he had heard through the grapevine about the planned sale. I sat in my little apartment that morning, holding that letter, and I realized that I had been handed the ultimate weapon. My children thought they were so clever, pushing their old mother aside to make a quick profit. They thought I was just a helpless old woman who would quietly go to a nursing home and fade away. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I called the lawyer immediately. Mr. Fitzgerald, Murphy's old attorney, was delighted to hear from me. "I've been wondering when you'd need to use this," he chuckled. "Murphy always said this day would come." Within a week, I had filed the necessary paperwork to invoke the covenant. The sale was halted immediately. The developer threatened to sue, but his lawyers quickly discovered that the covenant was ironclad. Edgar and Margaret were furious, confused, and completely blindsided. "Can't do this, Mama!" Edgar shouted when he stormed into my apartment. "We need that sale to go through. The restaurant is drowning in debt." "Then perhaps you should have managed it better," I replied calmly, sipping my tea. "Or perhaps you should have asked me before, taking out loans against a property you didn't fully own." But I wasn't finished. Oh no, dear ones, I was just getting started. You see, invoking the covenant meant that the property reverted to me personally. That meant all of Edgar's debts. All of those mysterious loans he had taken out. They were tied to a business that no longer had a legal right to operate on that property. The debt collectors could go after Edgar personally, but they couldn't touch the restaurant or the land. Within a month, I had evicted the Thompson family restaurant business from my property. I reopened under a new name, Mildred's Kitchen. Same location, same recipes, same heart and soul. But now it was truly mine, free and clear. The irony was delicious. Edgar and Margaret, who had thought they were so smart in managing the business side of things, had loaded up a business with debt while the most valuable asset, the property, was protected by a covenant they knew nothing about. But wait, there's more. Before I continue with what happened next, I hope you'll consider joining our community by hitting that subscribe button. Your support means the world to me and helps me share more stories like this one. Edgar's law practice began to suffer as creditors came after him for the restaurant's debts. Margaret's husband, learning about the financial mess, became less than understanding about her family's financial problems. The children who had been so eager to push me aside suddenly found themselves in serious financial trouble. Meanwhile, Mildred's Kitchen began to thrive. Without the burden of Edgar's mismanagement and mysterious debts, the restaurant returned to profitability almost immediately. Customers were thrilled to see me back in charge. The local newspaper did a feature story about my comeback. Food bloggers discovered us and wrote glowing reviews. But the sweetest revenge was yet to come. 3 months after I reopened as Mildred's Kitchen, Edgar and Margaret came to see me. They looked tired, defeated, humbled. Edgar had lost weight and gained gray hair. Margaret's designer clothes had been replaced with more modest attire. "Mama," Edgar said, his voice small and ashamed, "we're sorry. We made a terrible mistake." "We thought we knew what was best," Margaret added, tears in her eyes. "We thought we were protecting you, but we were really just protecting ourselves." They begged me to forgive them, to help them out of the financial hole they had dug for themselves. They promised to be better children, to respect me, to never again make decisions about my life without consulting me. I listened to their apologies with the patience of someone who had lived through decades of disappointment and betrayal. When they finished, I poured them each a cup of coffee and cut them slices of my famous apple pie. "Children," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I forgive you. I will always love you because you are my blood. But trust is something that must be earned back, one day at a time." I offered them a deal. They could work at Mildred's Kitchen, not as managers or decision-makers, but as employees. Edgar could wash dishes and bus tables. Margaret could wait tables and help with the cleaning. They would earn minimum wage, just like any other entry-level employee. "If you want to rebuild our relationship and earn back my trust," I told them, "you'll need to understand what it means to work for something instead of expecting it to be handed to you." Edgar, the successful lawyer, swallowed his pride and tied on an apron. Margaret, who hadn't worked a service job since she was a teenager, pinned up her hair, and learned to carry multiple plates at once. For 6 months, they worked alongside me. They saw the early mornings, the aching feet, the difficult customers, the endless cleaning. They began to understand what I had sacrificed for decades to build something for them. Slowly, very slowly, we began to rebuild our relationship. Not the old relationship, where I was taken for granted and pushed aside, but a new one based on mutual respect and understanding. Edgar used his legal skills to help me restructure the business properly, ensuring that I maintained full control while building in protections for the future. Margaret used her organizational abilities to streamline operations and improve efficiency, but they did it as my employees, not as my replacements. I hope those of you who've been following along will take a moment to subscribe to hear more. Stories of resilience and second chances. Your engagement helps me reach others who might need to hear these tales. Today, 2 years later, Mildred's Kitchen is more successful than the Thompson family restaurant ever was. We've been featured in Southern Living magazine and have a waiting list for Sunday dinner reservations. I've written a cookbook that's being published next spring. At 75, I'm busier and happier than I've been in years. Edgar has learned humility and respect. He still practices law, but now he also helps at the restaurant on weekends, and he never makes a decision about the business without consulting me first. Margaret has discovered that she actually enjoys the restaurant business and has become my trusted assistant manager, a position she earned through hard work, not inheritance. But perhaps the most important lesson came from the customers who supported me through this journey. Mrs. Chen, who has been coming to the restaurant for 20 years, told me something that I'll never forget. Mildred, we didn't come here just for the food. We came here for you. You made this place feel like home, like family. Your children forgot that. The business was never really about the building or the profits. It was about the love you put into everything you did. The covenant that old Mr. Murphy had insisted on all those years ago? It turns out he had lived through his own family betrayal. His children had tried to sell his restaurant out from under him to pay for their own extravagant lifestyles. The covenant was his way of ensuring that what happened to him wouldn't happen to future restaurant owners. Some people think restaurant ownership is about money, Murphy had told his lawyer. But real restaurant people know it's about feeding souls, not just stomachs. The building should protect the person who understands that, not the person who just sees dollar signs. Old Murphy had been wiser than I had ever realized. There are nights now when I lock up Mildred's Kitchen and walk slowly to my car, my joints aching, but my heart full, when I think about the lessons this experience taught me. I learned that you can't protect people from their own poor choices, but you can protect yourself from being destroyed by them. I learned that respect isn't automatically given based on age or relationship. It must be earned and maintained. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your life. My children learned that success built on the backs of others is fragile and temporary. They learned that family loyalty is a two-way street. They learned that their mother, whom they had dismissed as a helpless old woman, was actually a force to be reckoned with. The developer who wanted to build a shopping center? He found another location. The last I heard, his shopping center is struggling because it lacks the character and community connection that made our little restaurant district special. Before I finish this story, I want to encourage you one more time to subscribe and join our community. Stories like mine prove that it's never too late to fight for what's right, and your support helps spread these important messages. Some people might say that what I did was harsh, that I should have just accepted my children's decisions and quietly faded into the background. But I ask you this. When someone takes away your purpose, your dignity, and your life's work, what choice do you have but to fight back? I didn't shut down their favorite restaurant out of petty revenge. I reclaimed my life's work from people who had forgotten its true value. I taught my children a lesson about respect, hard work, and the consequences of taking advantage of those who love you. Today, as I write this story, Edgar is in the kitchen preparing tomorrow's soup specials. and Margaret is updating our social media pages with pictures of today's fresh-baked pies. They are not just my children anymore. They are my partners, my friends, and my collaborators in keeping Mildred's kitchen the warm, welcoming place it was always meant to be. The restaurant. Industry is tough, but it's also rewarding in ways that go far beyond money. When I see a family celebrating a birthday at table number 7, or when I watch an elderly couple share a piece of pie and remember their first date at our restaurant 50 years ago, I know that what I fought for was worth every moment of struggle. My story isn't just about shutting down a restaurant. It's about refusing to be discarded, about fighting for your dignity, and about the power of unexpected comebacks. It's about the importance of reading every document you sign and understanding that sometimes the most powerful weapons are hidden in the fine print. But most of all, it's about the fact that love without respect is worthless, and that sometimes the people who love you the most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons about how to treat you properly. I'm 75 years old now, and I have no intention of retiring anytime soon. Mildred's Kitchen will continue to serve the community as long as I'm able to stand in that kitchen and cook with love. And when the day comes that I can no longer do that, I'll make sure that the person who takes over understands what this place really represents. Not just a business, but a home, a legacy, and a testament to the power of never giving up on what matters most. The next time someone tries to push you aside because they think you're too old, too tired, or too set in your ways to fight back, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse, to go quietly into that good night, and remember that revenge, when it's really justice in disguise, can be the sweetest dish of all. The Ein Scheiker.